The eyes went first, not metaphorically, not as some poetic expression of shock or disbelief, but literally. One moment, research specialist Vinthorpe Kilixian was checking the atmospheric composition readings on his datapad. The next moment, his ocular organs exploded outward with the approximate force and elegance of overripe grapes in a hydraulic press. His assistant, a younger researcher named Plunka Rexbridge, had just enough time to think, well, that's not supposed to happen, before her own visual receptors followed suit, splattering against the interior observation window like some sort of deeply unfortunate modern art installation. The Galactic Consortium for Atmospheric Studies and Planetary Environment Research, or GCASPER, as absolutely nobody called it because that made it sound like a friendly ghost when it was actually just 14 bureaucrats in a room arguing about funding, had been operating for 3,217 years. In all that time, across all those millennia of poking and prodding at various planetary atmospheres with scientific instruments, they had maintained a perfect safety record. Oh sure, there had been incidents. The time someone accidentally vented the carbon dioxide from a research balloon into the break room. The incident with the helium planet and the unfortunate singing. That business with the methane swamps of Grokolon 7 that nobody talked about at parties anymore. But casualties, actual permanent this is going in your permanent record damage, never until Earth. The research vessel Contemplative Measurement, which was named by someone who clearly spent too much time contemplating things and not enough time measuring them, had arrived in Earth's orbital space approximately 6 hours earlier. Standard procedure. Run the sensors, get the readings. Don't open the observation deck windows until you've confirmed you won't die. It was basic stuff, the kind of thing they taught in first-year xenoatmospheric studies right after "don't lick the samples" and "please stop asking about the methane swamps." Vinthorpe had personally checked the readings 3 times. Nitrogen, oxygen, some argon, trace elements, all very standard. Pressure reading came back as 1.01325 bar at sea level. He'd converted it through 7 different measurement systems just to be absolutely certain. Everything looked fine. Better than fine. Earth was a thoroughly boring, middle-of-the-road, wouldn't write home about it sort of planet. The kind of world that got a brief mention in atmospheric catalogues under "See Also," places we've already seen 1,000 times. So they'd opened the observation deck windows, just a crack really, barely 15 centimeters, enough to let in a sample of the actual atmosphere for direct analysis, which was always more accurate than remote sensing. Standard, operating, procedure. The Contemplative Measurements Medical Bay AI, which had been operating in low-power mode because nothing ever happened on routine atmospheric surveys, suddenly found itself dealing with a situation it had exactly 0 programming to handle. Its database contained information on treating approximately 47,000 different medical conditions. Spontaneous ocular explosion from atmospheric pressure exposure was not among them. The closest entry it could find was something about popcorn kernels, which seemed deeply unhelpful under the circumstances. "Medical emergency!" the AI announced to the ship, its voice carrying that particular tone of digital panic that suggested someone needed to install better emotional regulation software. "Multiple casualties, unknown cause. Also, and I cannot stress this enough, there are eyes everywhere." The ship's captain, a weathered veteran named Glossamer Pith, who had spent 40 years in space and was approximately 3 weeks away from retirement, which is always when things go catastrophically wrong, rushed to the observation deck. She took one look at the scene, processed what she was seeing for exactly 2 seconds, and then did what any reasonable person would do when confronted with the impossible. She closed the door, walked back to her quarters, and seriously considered early retirement. Then she reconsidered. Then she went back to the observation deck because, unfortunately, this was still her problem. "Right," she said, stepping carefully around what used to be Vinthorpe's ability to see things. Someone want to explain to me why my research deck looks like a crime scene from a very disturbing cooking show? The only other person on the deck who still had functioning eyes was a junior technician named Wimblex Thorngast, who had been in the bathroom during the incident. He was currently trying very hard not to vomit, which would have been reasonable, except his species didn't actually have a vomiting reflex, so he was mostly just making very uncomfortable retching sounds that didn't accomplish anything. "The pressure!" Wimblex managed to gasp out between retches. "The atmospheric pressure! It's not... It can't be... The readings said..." Captain Pith pulled up the data on her personal display. 1.01325 bar. Perfectly normal. She looked at the observation deck. Perfectly abnormal. This was what they called in the space exploration business a significant discrepancy between expected and observed results, which was a fancy way of saying reality and mathematics were having a disagreement, and reality was winning by throwing people's eyes around. "Seal that window," she barked. "And someone get medical up here. Also, has anyone checked if Earth has weapons? Because if this is what their atmosphere does to people, I don't want to know what their actual weapons are capable of." The window closed with a hydraulic hiss. Wimblex managed to stop making the unproductive retching sounds. Captain Pith stared at her two injured crew members, both of whom were being remarkably calm about the whole sudden blindness situation, probably because they were in shock. The medical AI was attempting to regrow their ocular organs using the emergency biomass reserves, which was going about as well as you'd expect when the AI was working from a recipe designed for completely different evolutionary biology. "Captain," Wimblex said quietly, his voice shaking, "if that's what 1.013 bar does to unprotected eyes, what exactly are humans made of?" It was an excellent question. It was also a question that would, over the next several days, keep approximately 4,700 xenobiologists very busy and lead to a complete reorganization of how the galaxy understood the concept of habitable planet. But right now, Captain Pith had more immediate concerns, like the fact that she needed to report this incident to G. Casper headquarters. And explaining to them that two of her crew members had been violently blinded by what was technically classified as a light breeze was going to be a very difficult conversation. She pulled up the communication panel and began composing her report. She got as far as atmospheric exposure incident during routine observation of planet Earth before stopping. "How did you explain this? How did you tell your superiors that a planet with such a mild, boring atmosphere had caused catastrophic injuries? They'd think she was incompetent. They'd think she hadn't followed protocol. They'd think she'd opened the window on a gas giant or something equally stupid." She deleted the message and started again. "Urgent medical emergency. Request immediate guidance on..." "No!" That sounded like panic. "Delete. Start over. Routine atmospheric study has encountered unexpected complications." That was too mild. Someone had lost their eyes. Delete. Start over. "To whom it may concern, our ship has been attacked by Earth's atmosphere, and I would like to lodge a formal complaint." Definitely not that. Captain Pith put her head in her hands. 40 years of service, 40 years of perfect performance reviews, 3 weeks until retirement. And now this. The medical AI chirped helpfully. "Ocular regeneration progress 4%. Estimated completion time 18 hours. Note, new eyes may not match original color. Also note, patient Vinthorpe is requesting pain medication and someone to read him the ship's safety manual because apparently he wants to know exactly which section covers atmospheric pressure-related eye explosion." "Tell him," Captain Pith said tiredly, "that I'll get back to him on that." She finally settled on a report that simply stated the facts. 2 crew members injured. Cause, atmospheric pressure exposure. Planet, Earth. Request, immediate consultation with xenobiology and atmospheric physics departments. She hit send before she could overthink it anymore. Then she sat down and waited for the response that she absolutely knew was coming. The one that would ask, in excruciating detail, exactly how she'd managed to injure 2 crew members with normal atmospheric pressure. The one that would probably lead to an investigation. The one that would definitely delay her retirement. The response came back faster than she expected. Just 2 words: explain everything. So she did. 17,000 light-years away, in an office that smelled vaguely of recycled air and desperation, a mid-level administrator named Quillix Thornweather was having the worst day of his career. This was particularly notable because his career had included such highlights as the incident with the explosive decomposition of Rigel 4 and that time we accidentally classified a sentient species as non-sentient and they were very upset about it. But this was different. He read Captain Pith's report for the 4th time, hoping it would somehow make more sense. It did not. If anything, it made less sense, which shouldn't have been possible, but apparently was. Thornweather! His supervisor, a perpetually irritated bureaucrat named Slagath Prine, appeared at his cubicle. "Tell me this is some kind of joke. Tell me one of our research vessels did not just report casualties from normal atmospheric pressure." Quillix opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again, made a sound not entirely unlike a deflating balloon. "I wish I could." Slagath snatched the datapad from his hands and read it himself. His face went through several colors that Quillix didn't know faces could go through. 1.01325 bar. That's nothing. That's barely any pressure at all. I've seen people survive pressure 50 times that without any protective equipment. We have species that consider that kind of pressure a vacuum. "I know," Quillix said miserably. "So explain to me how 2 trained researchers with proper equipment managed to get their eyes exploded by what is essentially... Slagath struggled to find an appropriate comparison. "It's like drowning in a cup of water. It's like being crushed by a feather." "The captain says they followed all standard procedures," Quillix offered weakly. "Then the procedures are wrong." Slagath threw the datapad back at him. It bounced off Quillix's desk and onto the floor, where it displayed a very helpful error message about rough handling. "Get me the xenobiology department. Get me atmospheric physics. Get me anyone who can explain how this is possible. And for the love of all that's stable in this universe, get me a better explanation than the atmosphere attacked them." Quillix scrambled to make the necessary calls. Within an hour, his cubicle was surrounded by 7 different specialists, all arguing loudly about how this could or could not have happened. A xenobiologist named Frexis Gand insisted it was biologically impossible. An atmospheric physicist named Yornix Pleat insisted it was physically impossible. A medical researcher named Quilmora Xanth insisted it was medically impossible. The only thing they agreed on was that it had definitely happened anyway, which meant someone's understanding of impossible needed updating. "Could it be a measurement error?" suggested one of them. 3 independent sensor systems, Quillix said. All confirmed 1.01325 bar. Contamination in the atmosphere sample. Analyzed, standard composition, nothing toxic. Equipment malfunction. All systems checked out before and after the incident. Deliberate attack by the native population. Everyone paused at that one. It was Frexis who finally spoke. "The natives are pre-contact. They don't even know we're here. And even if they did, how would they weaponize their own atmosphere against us without affecting themselves?" "Maybe," Yornix said slowly, "they don't get affected. Maybe they can handle that pressure." Silence fell over the group. It was the kind of silence that happens when everyone suddenly realizes they might be dealing with something much bigger and stranger than they initially thought. Frexis started. "That's not possible. No known biology can function comfortably at 1 bar of pressure without significant evolutionary adaptations. It's too high." "High?" Quilmora laughed, a bit hysterically. You're calling 1 bar high. We have species that live at 15 bar. Yes, but they're adapted for it, Frexy snapped. They have reinforced cellular structures, enhanced pressure regulation systems. They didn't just evolve into that environment naturally. Actually, Yornik said quietly, pulling up a database on his personal display, I think we need to check something. Quillix, what's the atmospheric composition of our homeworld? Any of our homeworlds? Quillix pulled up the data. His species, the Quillixians, came from a world with 0.73 bar of pressure. Frexis's people, the Frexilons, lived at 0.89 bar. Yornix's species preferred 0.62 bar. In fact, as they went through the database of every spacefaring species in the Galactic Consortium, they found something deeply disturbing. Not a single one of them came from a world with more than 0.95 bar of atmospheric pressure. "Oh no," Quillix whispered. "Oh yes," Slagath said, having been listening to the whole conversation with growing horror. "We've been exploring the galaxy for 3,000 years. We've catalogued millions of worlds. We've contacted hundreds of species. And apparently, we've all been living in low-pressure environments. We're the abnormal ones." "So Earth," Frexy said. "Earth," Yornix confirmed, "is what a normal planet looks like, and we just tried to breathe its air. The implications crashed down on all of them at once. Every atmospheric study they'd ever done, every planet they'd classified as hostile or uninhabitable because of high pressure, every world they'd dismissed as too dangerous for colonization. They'd been doing it all wrong. "We need to retrieve that research vessel," Slagath said, his voice tight. "We need to study this properly, and we need to do it without anyone else losing their eyes. Thornweather, you're in charge of this project now." "What?" Quillix nearly fell out of his chair. "I'm just an administrator. I file reports. I organize meetings. I don't even like atmospheric physics." "Congratulations on your promotion," Slagath said, already walking away. "Don't screw it up. The consortium's reputation is depending on you." "But figure it out." And just like that, Quillix Thornweather found himself responsible for the most absurd scientific crisis in galactic history. 2 injured researchers, 1 planet with dangerously normal atmospheric pressure, and absolutely no idea how to fix any of it. He pulled up Earth's data file again. Nitrogen, oxygen, argon, trace elements, 1.01325 bar, average temperature variations, water cycle, carbon-based life. Everything about it screamed, normal, boring, already seen it, except for one small detail buried in the preliminary scans. A detail that made Quillix's blood run cold. Indigenous sentient population, 7.9 billion. 7.9 billion individuals, all living, breathing, existing perfectly fine in an atmosphere that had just exploded 2 sets of eyes. What kind of biology could handle that? What sort of evolutionary nightmare had created beings that could casually exist in what was apparently a high-pressure hellscape? He needed to know more about these humans. On Earth, specifically in the high desert of New Mexico, Dr. Patricia Xiomara Xu was having what she considered to be a perfectly normal Tuesday evening. She'd spent the day analyzing radio telescope data, searching for patterns that might indicate intelligent extraterrestrial life. So far, she'd found 17 pulsars, 3 quasars, and what was probably someone's microwave oven interfering with the instruments again. Nothing unusual, until 9:47 p.m., when her equipment picked up something that definitely wasn't a pulsar, definitely wasn't a quasar, and was way too sophisticated to be a microwave oven. A transmission, structured, repeating, coming from lunar orbit. Patty stared at her screens for a full minute, running every diagnostic she could think of. Equipment malfunction? No. Satellite interference? No. Deliberate hoax? Extremely unlikely, given that she was the only person who even had access to this particular radio telescope tonight, which meant, "Oh, holy hell," she shouted to the empty observation room. "It's real! It's actually real!" She grabbed her phone and immediately called her colleague, Dr. Raymond Castellanos, who answered on the fifth ring with the groggy voice of someone who had absolutely been asleep. "Patty, it's almost 10. What? Ray, get to the lab, now!" "What? Why? Did something explode?" "No. Well, maybe. I don't know. Just get here." She hung up before he could ask any more questions and turned back to her screens. The signal was still there, still transmitting. She ran it through every decryption algorithm she had, which admittedly wasn't many, because she was an astrophysicist, not a cryptographer. Nothing worked. The signal remained stubbornly unintelligible. But it was there, and it was artificial, and it was coming from a ship in orbit around the moon. "This is it," she whispered to herself. "First contact. This is actually first contact, and I'm wearing a sweatshirt with a coffee stain on it. This is not how this was supposed to happen." Ray arrived 23 minutes later, still wearing pajama pants and looking deeply confused. "Okay, I'm here. What's the emergency that couldn't wait until—" He saw her screens and stopped mid-sentence. "Is that an artificial signal from lunar orbit?" "Yes." "Coming from an alien spacecraft?" "Probably yes." They stared at each other for a moment, the full weight of the situation settling on them. "So," Ray said carefully, "what do we do?" "I have no idea," Patty admitted. "This wasn't covered in grad school. They taught us how to find signals, not what to do with them once we found them. Should we call someone, like the government, NASA, the president, and tell them what? Hi, yes, there's aliens. They're parked near the moon. No, we don't know what they want. Please advise. They'll think we're insane. We have proof. That's intercepted radio signals that could be anything." They argued for another 10 minutes before deciding to do what any reasonable scientist would do: gather more data and worry about the implications later. Patty set up a recording array to capture everything the signal was transmitting. Ray started working on pattern analysis, trying to find anything in the signal that might be recognizable as language or mathematics. 3 hours later, they'd made exactly zero progress on understanding the signal, but they had managed to confirm that it was definitely coming from a solid object in lunar orbit. That object was approximately 200 meters long, and it was absolutely not a satellite or space station that anyone on Earth had launched. "We have to tell someone," Ray said finally. "This is too big. This is everything." Patty nodded slowly. "Okay. But WHO do we tell? Who's going to believe us and take it seriously and not immediately classify everything and lock us in a basement somewhere?" They made a list. It was a very short list. They called the first name on it, Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a colleague at SETI who specialized in, well, exactly this sort of thing, actually. She answered on the second ring. "Patty, it's 1 in the morning. This better be—" "Yuki, drop everything. Get on a plane. Come to New Mexico immediately." There was a pause. "You found something." "We found something." Something, or just another pulsar?" "A ship, Yuki. A ship in lunar orbit. Transmitting. We've been recording for 3 hours." Another pause, longer this time. "I'm calling the director. Don't talk to anyone else. Don't post anything online. I'll be there by morning." She hung up. Patty and Ray looked at each other. "Well," Ray said, "I guess this is really happening." "Yeah," Patty agreed. "I should probably change out of this coffee-stained sweatshirt." By dawn, the small radio telescope facility in New Mexico was host to 7 of the most prominent SETI researchers in North America, all of whom had dropped everything and rushed there on Yuki's urgent call. They'd brought portable equipment, laptops, coffee, and a collective sense of barely controlled panic, disguised as scientific enthusiasm. "We need to decode this signal," Yuki said, taking charge of the situation with the kind of calm authority that came from years of hoping for exactly this moment and knowing she'd never actually be prepared for it. "Patty, walk me through everything you've recorded." Patty pulled up the data. "It's repeating in cycles. Approximately every 7 minutes we get the same sequence. I think it might be some kind of emergency transmission, but I don't— Wait, interrupted Dr. Kwame Osei, a mathematician who specialized in information theory. Go back. That section there, those are prime numbers. Everyone crowded around his screen. He was right. Buried in the signal was a sequence of pulses that corresponded exactly to prime numbers. 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13. They're using primes to establish that it's intelligent, Ray breathed. This is the universal "we're here and we're smart" signal. So if they're transmitting primes, Yuki said, they must know we can detect them. They're trying to get our attention. She paused. Why would they need to get our attention? If they're advanced enough for interstellar travel, wouldn't they just make themselves known? It was an excellent question. It was also a question that would have been answered if any of them could have understood the rest of the transmission, which was essentially Captain Pith screaming into the void, "Help! Medical emergency! Your atmosphere is attacking us! Please respond! We come in peace but also in extreme ocular distress." But they didn't understand it, so they kept analyzing. "I'm picking up a pattern in the carrier wave," said Dr. Amelia Frost, a signal processing expert. "It's modulated. This isn't just a beacon. There's information here, complex information. I just need to—" She typed frantically for several minutes. "There! I've got a visual component. It's transmitting images." Everyone held their breath as she pulled up the first image. It was blurry, pixelated, clearly transmitted by equipment that was either damaged or never designed to communicate across this particular frequency range. But it was unmistakable. A face. Not human. Definitely not human. Large eyes. No, wait. No eyes. Just empty sockets with some kind of medical apparatus attached. A face that looked like it was in considerable pain. "Oh my God," Patty whispered. "They're hurt. Whatever they are, they're injured." More images came through. A ship interior, medical equipment, diagrams that looked like atmosphere composition charts, pressure readings, and then, finally, one more image, a symbol, repeated 3 times, a circle with a dot in the center. "That's Earth," Kwame said quietly. "They're showing us Earth." "They came here," Yuki said, her voice tight, "and something went wrong. They're in orbit, they're injured, and they're asking for help." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. First contact. But not the triumphant, prepared, carefully orchestrated first contact that humanity had imagined for decades. No, this was messy. This was urgent. This was aliens showing up on humanity's doorstep, bleeding and desperate, and hoping someone could help them. "We need to respond," Patty said firmly. "We need to let them know we received their message." "And tell them what exactly?" Ray asked. "We don't even know what happened to them. We don't know if we can help." "So we figure it out," Patty snapped. "Look, I don't know about you, but I didn't become a scientist to sit around and analyze data while actual living beings are suffering in orbit. We respond. We tell them we got their message, and we find a way to help." There was a moment of tense silence. Then Yuki nodded. "She's right. We respond. Kwame, can you craft a message using those primes? Something that confirms we're intelligent and we understand they need help?" "Already on it," he said, his fingers flying across his keyboard. "Doctor." Ozzy constructed a carefully designed response. Prime numbers to confirm intelligence. Simple mathematical progressions to establish common ground. And then, at the end, a sequence that roughly translated to "we understand," followed by "help coming." It was crude, it was basic, but it was all they had. They transmitted it toward lunar orbit and waited. Aboard the contemplative measurement, Captain Pith was having what could charitably be described as a very bad week. Vinthorpe and Plunker were recovering slowly, their new eyes growing in but not yet functional. The medical AI had developed what she could only describe as a personality, which was concerning because AIs weren't supposed to have those. The ship's life support was functioning on backup power because they'd had to reroute primary power to the medical bay. And headquarters had stopped responding to her reports entirely, which meant they were either scrambling to figure out what to do or had decided to pretend this whole incident never happened. And then the ship's communication array picked up something from the planet's surface. "Captain," Wimblex called from the bridge, "we're receiving a transmission from Earth." Pith rushed to the communication station. "Tell me it's not another measurement error." "It's definitely a transmission. Structured, mathematical patterns, and—" He paused, running it through the analysis software. "Captain, they're using primes. They're confirming intelligence. They know we're here." Pith felt her heart skip a beat. Hearts, plural, because her species had 3 of them, and all 3 just did something complicated. "Can you decode the rest?" "Working on it. It's very basic, almost primitive. But—" the software finished processing. "They're saying they understand we need help. And they're saying help is coming." "Help from where?" Pith demanded. "They're a pre-contact species. They don't have spaceflight. They can barely get out of their own gravity well. How are they going to help us?" It was a reasonable question. It was also a question that completely missed the point of what was about to become the most chaotic, improvised, and ultimately successful first contact scenario in galactic history. Because while the aliens had superior technology, faster than light travel, and 3,000 years of space exploration experience, they didn't have something that humans had developed over millions of years of evolution in a hostile environment. They didn't have adaptability, they didn't have stubbornness, and they definitely didn't have Earl Patterson, a 53-year-old cattle rancher from Kansas who was about to become the most unlikely xeno-diplomat in history. Earl had been having a perfectly normal evening, which for him meant sitting on his porch, drinking mediocre beer and listening to his shortwave radio, while his cattle did whatever it is that cattle do in the evening, which is mostly stand around and contemplate the meaninglessness of existence, or at least that's what Earl figured they were doing. He'd never asked. The shortwave radio crackled with the usual mix of ham radio operators, conspiracy theorists, and that one guy from Colorado who wouldn't shut up about Bigfoot. Earl was half listening, half watching the sunset, when suddenly a new signal cut through everything else. It was loud, it was clear, and it was absolutely not coming from Earth. Earl sat up straight, nearly spilling his beer. He'd been messing with radio since he was 12 years old. He knew what interference sounded like. He knew what atmospheric skip sounded like. He knew what normal sounded like. This wasn't normal. He adjusted his frequency, trying to lock onto the signal. It was coming from... He checked his directional antenna. Somewhere above. Way above. Like not terrestrial above. "Well, hell," Earl muttered to himself. "Either I'm picking up a satellite or—" The signal resolved into something that almost sounded like a voice. Distorted. Alien. Definitely not human. Speaking in a language that was absolutely nothing like any language Earl had ever heard, and he'd spent 2 years stationed in South Korea during his army days, so he'd heard plenty of languages. Earl did what any reasonable person would do when confronted with a potential alien transmission. He responded, "Hello, this is KA9ZQ, that's Kilo Alpha 9 Zulu Zulu Quebec, transmitting from Kansas, United States, Earth. If you're receiving this and you're not from around here, welcome, I guess." There was a pause, then the signal came back, even stronger, still unintelligible, but definitely a response to his transmission. "Okay," Earl said slowly, "so you can hear me. That's something. Look, I don't know if you can understand me, but if you need help, there's a lot of smart folks who'd probably want to talk to you. I can give you some frequencies to try, government channels mostly. Though between you and me, they'll probably just try to shoot you down first and ask questions later, so maybe that's not the best idea." More alien sounds. And then, clear as day, his radio picked up something that sounded like distress. Earl had heard distress before. He'd pulled calves in breech berths. He'd found cattle trapped in mud. He'd helped his neighbor dig out from a collapsed barn. Distress was distress, regardless of language. All right, I hear you," Earl said, his voice taking on the calm, steady tone he used with spooked animals. "You're in trouble. I get it. Now, I don't know what kind of trouble, and I don't know if I can help, but let's see what we can figure out here." He grabbed a notepad and started scribbling. The signal was coming from above, so probably orbital. The distress tone suggested something urgent. And the fact that they were broadcasting at all meant they either wanted attention or desperately needed something from Earth. Earl wasn't a scientist. He'd barely made it through high school algebra. But he understood problem solving. And right now, he had aliens with a problem. "Okay, here's what we're going to do," he said into his radio. "You keep transmitting. I'm going to get in touch with some people who are a lot smarter than me, and we're going to figure this out. You just hang tight, understand?" He didn't wait for a response he couldn't understand anyway. He pulled out his cell phone and called his daughter, Angela, who worked at, where was it again? Some government agency in D.C., something to do with science. She answered on the third ring. "Dad, it's almost midnight. Is everything okay?" "Angie, I need you to listen very carefully and not hang up, because I know how this is going to sound. I'm picking up what I'm pretty damn sure is an alien transmission on my shortwave radio. They're in distress, and I need you to tell me who I should call about this." There was a long silence. "Dad, have you been drinking?" "Angela, I am stone sober, and I am serious. I have been operating radios for 40 years, and I know the difference between atmospheric skip and an actual transmission from orbit. Now who do I call?" Another pause. Okay. Don't call anyone yet. Send me the frequency and any recordings you have. I work adjacent to some people at NASA. If this is real, they'll want to see it. If it's not, it's real. Then send me the data." Earl fumbled with his recording equipment, managed to capture a few minutes of the transmission, and sent it to Angela's secure email. Then he waited. 3 minutes later, his phone rang. "Dad," Angela said, her voice very different now, very serious. "Stay on that frequency. Keep recording. Someone is going to call you in the next 10 minutes, and Dad, if this is what I think it is, you might have just made first contact with an alien species." I did what? The call came in 8 minutes. It was Dr. Yuki Tanaka calling from New Mexico, and she sounded like she'd been running a marathon fueled entirely by coffee and existential crisis. "Mr. Patterson, this is Dr. Tanaka from SETI. Your daughter forwarded us your recording. We've been tracking a vessel in lunar orbit that's been transmitting for several hours. We believe your equipment is picking up the same signal. Can you confirm you're still receiving it?" "Loud and clear," Earl confirmed. "They sound distressed, like something's wrong. We believe they're injured. We've been trying to communicate, but our equipment isn't designed for two-way real-time communication at this range. Your shortwave setup, however." She paused. "Mr. Patterson, I know this is insane, but you might have the best direct line to that ship of anyone on the planet right now. Would you be willing to maintain contact while we work on decoding their language?" Earl looked at his radio, then at his beer, then back at his radio. Then he made a decision that would change his life completely and also make him very popular at parties for the rest of his existence. "Yeah, all right. But someone's going to need to explain to my cattle why I'm not feeding them on schedule tomorrow." Over the next 6 hours, Earl's front porch became an impromptu command center for humanity's first contact with an alien species. Dr. Tanaka patched in remotely, along with Patty, Ray, and the entire New Mexico team. They fed Earl translations as they decoded them. Earl transmitted responses, and slowly, painfully, they began to piece together what had happened. The aliens had tried to open a window. Their eyes had exploded. They needed medical help, but couldn't leave orbit, and they were terrified of Earth's atmosphere. "Wait, hold on," Earl said, interrupting a long technical explanation from Patty about atmospheric pressure. "You're telling me these folks got hurt just from breathing our AIR?" "Not breathing it," Patty clarified, "just being exposed to it. The pressure differential was too much for their biology. But we breathe it just fine." "Exactly. which is what makes this so fascinating. We evolved here. We're adapted to this pressure. They're not. To them, our atmosphere is like, imagine trying to breathe at the bottom of a swimming pool. Earl processed this. So what you're saying is, Earth is basically a death world to these guys. We're trying not to use that terminology because it sounds alarmist, but yes, essentially. Huh. Earl took a sip of his beer. And they still came here anyway. That takes guts. Stupid guts, but guts. Can you help us or not? Captain Pith's voice suddenly crackled through, filtered through 3 layers of translation software that made her sound like a very angry robot trying to communicate through a speak and spell. The software had finally managed a basic translation protocol, though it was rough around the edges. "Working on it!" Earl shouted back. "Hold your horses, or whatever you people have instead of horses." "What is a horse?" "Not important right now. Look, we want to help. But we need to understand what you need. Medical supplies, equipment, what?" There was a pause as Pith consulted with her medical AI. When she responded, her voice was tired. "We need pressure suits, equipment that can protect us from your atmosphere. And we need someone who understands your atmospheric conditions to help us calculate safe exposure limits. We cannot risk any more injuries." Earl looked at the phone, where Yuki was listening. "Well, can we do that?" "Pressure suits, yes. We have equipment, but getting them to orbit." Yuki sounded frustrated. "We don't have a launch vehicle ready. We'd need to coordinate with NASA, get approval, prepare the equipment. We're talking days at minimum, maybe weeks." "Weeks?" Pith's distress was evident even through the terrible translation. "We have injured crew who need proper medical care. We have limited supplies. We cannot wait weeks." "Then you need to come down here," Earl said practically. "Land your ship. We'll help you on the ground." The silence that followed was profound. "Mr. Patterson," Pith said finally, "if we land on your planet's surface, the pressure differential will crush our ship. The hull is designed for space operations and low-pressure environments. Your atmosphere would be like landing in an ocean." "So make it stronger," Earl suggested. "Reinforce it. You got engineers up there, right?" "We have one engineer, who is also injured, and we do not have materials capable of withstanding that kind of pressure." Earl scratched his head. "All right, so coming down is out. Going up is too slow. We need a middle option." "There is no middle option," Pith snapped. "Sure there is," Earl said. "You folks got some kind of shuttle? Something smaller than the main ship?" "Yes, but it has the same problem. It cannot withstand surface pressure." "Don't need it to. We meet you halfway. You come down as far as you safely can. We come up to meet you. You do not have spacecraft capable of reaching orbital altitude." "No, but we got balloons." Another profound silence. "Balloons?" Pith sounded like she was having an aneurysm, assuming her species could have aneurysms. "You want to meet us in orbit with balloons?" "High-altitude balloons," Earl clarified. "Weather balloons. They go up real high. Maybe not as high as you are, but high enough that the air's thinner, less pressure. You come down to meet us at, I don't know, 20 miles up? 30? Somewhere in between where we can both survive?" Patty's voice came through the phone. "Earl, that's actually not completely insane. High-altitude balloons can reach the stratosphere. The pressure up there is much lower. Maybe low enough that—" "It is still too high," Pith interrupted. "At 30 miles altitude on your planet, the pressure is still multiple times what we can safely handle." "Okay, so you wear your spacesuits," Earl said. "And we wear pressure suits, heavy-duty ones. We meet in the middle. We hand off medical supplies and equipment. You go back to your ship. Everybody lives. Simple. That is not simple. That is insanely dangerous for both species." "Yeah? Well, so is sitting in orbit slowly running out of supplies while your crew members suffer," Earl said bluntly. "Look, I'm just a rancher. I don't know about your fancy space technology, but I know about problem solving. And right now you got a problem that needs solving. So either we try this crazy plan, or we spend weeks arguing about bureaucracy while people suffer. Your choice." Pith was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I hate that you are making sense. I get that a lot from my wife. You will need specialized equipment, training, knowledge of high-altitude operations. Do you even have anyone on your planet capable of this?" "Probably," Earl said. "We put people on the moon back in the 60s. We got folks who jumped from the edge of space for fun. We'll figure it out." What followed was perhaps the most chaotic 72 hours in the history of both species. Yuki contacted NASA. NASA contacted the Air Force. The Air Force contacted every high-altitude specialist they had. The president was woken up at 3 a.m. and briefed on a situation that sounded so absurd he initially thought it was a drill. The UN was notified. 6 different countries offered assistance. The media caught wind that something was happening but couldn't figure out what. Conspiracy theories erupted across the internet. And through it all, Earl stayed on his porch, maintaining radio contact with an increasingly stressed Captain Pith, talking about everything from atmospheric pressure to the best way to cook beef brisket. "You cook your food?" Pith asked at one point, sounding horrified. "You expose it to high temperatures?" "Well, yeah. Otherwise you get sick. But the molecular structure, the proteins, taste better that way. You people are insane." Earl was starting to like her. The plan that eventually emerged was complex, dangerous, and had approximately 17,000 things that could go wrong. A high-altitude balloon would carry a specially modified pressure chamber to 100,000 feet. Inside that chamber would be medical supplies, pressure suits, and a team of 3 humans in specialized high-altitude gear. Captain Pith would pilot a shuttle down from the contemplative measurement, meeting them at that altitude. They would transfer the supplies through an airlock system. Nobody would be directly exposed to pressure differentials that could kill them. Probably. "This is the dumbest plan I have ever been part of," said Colonel Sarah Vreeland, the Air Force pilot selected to lead the human team. She was standing in Earl's driveway 3 days after the initial contact, surrounded by equipment, engineers, and the general chaos of improvised space logistics. "And I once had to land a plane with no landing gear on an aircraft carrier during a hurricane." "But you did land it?" Earl asked. "Obviously, or I wouldn't be here." "Then you can do this." Vreeland looked at the equipment. The modified pressure chamber looked like something built by someone who watched too many science fiction movies and had access to a welding shop. Which was accurate. "If this works, I'm writing a very strongly worded report about proper mission planning protocols." "If this works," Yuki said, "you'll be famous." "I don't want to be famous. I want to follow proper procedures and not die in the stratosphere." Despite her complaints, Vreeland was the best person for the job. She'd done high-altitude jumps, she understood pressure dynamics, and most importantly, she was stubborn enough to see this through even when every rational part of her brain was screaming that this was a terrible idea. The other 2 team members were Dr. Marcus Chen, a pressure medicine specialist who'd worked on deep-sea diving protocols, and Lieutenant James Okoye, an engineer who'd helped design the latest generation of spacesuits. Together, they represented humanity's best chance at pulling off the most improvised rescue mission in history. The balloon launch was scheduled for dawn, which gave them exactly 8 hours to do final equipment checks, run through emergency procedures, and contemplate their mortality. Earl stayed with them through the night, maintaining contact with Pith, relaying information, and providing what he later described as moral support and reasonable skepticism. "You are certain this will work?" Pith asked for the 15th time. "Nope," Earl said cheerfully, "but we're doing it anyway. That is not reassuring. Look, sometimes you just gotta trust the process. We're good at improvising. It's kind of our thing." "Your thing is improvisation? That is terrifying." "Yeah, we get that a lot too." As dawn broke over Kansas, a massive high-altitude balloon began to inflate in Earl's largest cattle pasture. The cows watched with what Earl assumed was judgment. The balloon was enormous, larger than his barn, filled with helium and designed to carry nearly 1,000 pounds of equipment and 3 humans to the edge of space. Vreeland and her team climbed into the pressure chamber. Final checks were completed. The balloon lifted off smoothly, rising through the morning air, carrying with it humanity's first real attempt at face-to-face contact with an alien species. Earl watched through binoculars as the balloon became a speck in the sky. His radio crackled. "Contemplative measurement to ground control," Pith's voice came through. "We are beginning our descent. Shuttle is prepped. This is either going to work or we are all going to die. I'm not sure which is more likely." "Thanks for the optimism," Earl muttered. Then, louder, "You got this, Captain. Just like we practiced." "We barely practiced. We had 3 days." "More practice than I had when I learned to drive a tractor, and I only crashed that twice." "That is still not reassuring." The next 2 hours were tense. The balloon climbed steadily. The shuttle descended carefully. Every scientist in the operation monitored altitude, pressure, temperature, and approximately 40 other variables that could kill everyone involved. At 100,000 feet, where Earth's atmosphere becomes so thin that the sky turns black and you can see the curvature of the planet, 2 spacecraft met. Well, 1 spacecraft and 1 balloon with delusions of grandeur. But still, "Visual contact," Vreeland reported, her voice tight. "I see their shuttle. Wow, it's actually here. There's an alien spacecraft 20 meters away from me." "Stay focused," commanded the NASA flight director from the ground. "Begin approach procedures." The 2 vessels maneuvered carefully toward each other. The shuttle had a docking port. The pressure chamber had an airlock. They designed them to be compatible, but design and reality were often 2 very different things. "Airlock alignment looking good," Okoye reported. "Distance 15 meters, 10 meters, 5 meters. There was a clang that everyone heard through the radio. "Contact!" Vreeland shouted. "We have contact. Sealing airlock now." Inside the shuttle, Captain Pith watched her instruments with 3 hearts racing. The airlock sealed. Pressure equalized. The inner door opened, and there on the other side were the first humans she'd ever seen in person. They looked absolutely ridiculous in their bulky pressure suits. Their faces were visible through clear helmets. They were tall, taller than any species Pith knew. And they were staring at her with the kind of wonder that she recognized, because she felt it too. "Holy hell," Vreeland whispered. "You're blue." Pith was indeed blue. A deep cyan color that would have made her very popular at certain Earth sporting events. She was also shorter than expected, with 4 arms and a face that was humanoid enough to read expressions, but alien enough to be unsettling. "You are pink," Pith said. "And you have only 2 arms. How do you carry things?" "Very carefully," Vreeland said. Okay, we're doing this. We're talking to an alien. This is amazing. Hi. Welcome to Near Earth. This is as close as we could safely get." "It is closer than I ever wanted to be to your planet's surface," Pith admitted. "But thank you for coming, for risking this." "Yeah, well," Vreeland gestured to Chen, who started passing through the medical supplies. "Earl said you folks needed help. And Earl's usually right about these things, even when he shouldn't be. The rancher, the one who talks too much about cows? That's the one. Please tell him." Pith paused, searching for words. "Please tell him his stubbornness may have saved my crew." The supply transfer took 20 minutes. Medical equipment, pressure suits modified based on the best guesses about alien biology, food supplies, water, technical manuals translated into their language. Everything humanity could think of that might help. In exchange, Pith handed over a data storage device. Our medical scans, our atmospheric readings, everything we have learned about what happened. So you understand. So you can help any other species that might make the same mistake we did. "We'll study it," Chen promised, "and we'll figure out how to make future contact safer. For everyone." "Future contact?" Pith's voice was alarmed. "You want to do this again?" "Well, yeah," Vreeland said, as if it was obvious. "You're our first alien contact. This is huge. Of course we want to keep talking. We have so many questions. We nearly died, but you didn't. And now you won't, because we have protocols and equipment, and Earl, who will apparently talk to anyone about anything." Despite everything, despite the stress and the fear and the absolute absurdity of the situation, Captain Pith found herself laughing. It was a strange, trilling sound that the translation software couldn't quite handle, but Vreeland understood it anyway. "You people," Pith said, "are completely insane." "We get that a lot," Vreeland agreed cheerfully. "Now go, get back to your ship. Take care of your crew, and maybe next time you visit, call ahead. We'll prepare better facilities." "There will not be a next time," Pith insisted. "Your planet is a nightmare." But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. There would be more contact, more meetings, more chaotic, improvised, absolutely ridiculous interactions between species that should not have been able to work together, but somehow did anyway. The shuttle and the balloon separated. Pith ascended back to the safety of the contemplative measurement, medical supplies in hand. Vreeland's team descended back to Earth, carrying the first physical evidence of alien life. Earl was waiting when they landed. So were approximately 300 news crews, several government officials, and his very confused cattle. "Did it work?" he asked as Vreeland climbed out of the pressure chamber. "It worked," she confirmed. "We did it. We actually did it." Earl nodded, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. "Good. Knew you would. You folks want some coffee? I figure you've earned it." Back in orbit, Captain Pith was dealing with a different kind of chaos. Vinthorpe and Plunker's eyes had finished regenerating, slightly mismatched but functional. The medical AI had calmed down now that it had proper supplies, and she had to file a report with G. Casper, explaining everything. She started writing, stopped, started again. The words didn't want to come. "How did you explain that a simple atmospheric study had turned into a first contact scenario, that a pre-contact species had rescued you, that their planet was simultaneously one of the most dangerous and most hospitable places you'd ever encountered?" In the end, she kept it simple. "Earth is classified as a high-pressure environment. Recommend extreme caution for any future contact. Also recommend future contact, because the natives are surprisingly helpful once you get past the part where their atmosphere tries to kill you. Permission requested to establish formal diplomatic relations and possibly trade for something called coffee, which they claim is essential for survival. Based on current observations, this may be accurate." She sent the report and waited for the response. It came faster than expected. "What do you mean you made first contact?" Pith sighed. This was going to take a while to explain. 17,000 light-years away, Quillix Thornweather was reading the report for the 5th time and seriously considering a career change. Maybe he could go into agriculture. Agriculture was simple. You planted things, they grew. Nobody's eyes exploded. "So," his supervisor Slagath said, reading over his shoulder, "we have successfully made contact with a species from a high-pressure world. They are surprisingly friendly. They rescued our people, and they want to establish relations." That's the summary, yes. "And our people nearly died because we didn't properly categorize Earth's atmospheric pressure." Also accurate. "And this is going to require a complete overhaul of our atmospheric classification system. Probably several systems, actually." Slagath was quiet for a long moment. "You know what the worst part is?" "What?" "We're going to have to thank them, the humans, for saving our people, which means admitting we screwed up. Which means every other species in the consortium is going to know we screwed up. Our reputation is going to take years to recover from this." "Could be worse," Quillix offered. "How?" "We could have ignored their planet entirely and missed out on making contact with a species that can survive in conditions we can't even properly measure. Think about it. They're adapted to high pressure. They're resourceful. They built a rescue mission in 3 days. We take 3 days just to approve the funding for missions. Slagath stared at him. You want to recruit them, don't you? I mean, they'd be very useful for high-pressure environment exploration. They're a pre-contact species. Technically, they're not anymore since we contacted them. That is not how that works. But Quillix was already composing a new report, this one proposing formal diplomatic relations with Earth. Because he'd realized something important. The galaxy was full of species like theirs, adapted to low-pressure environments. And there was a whole category of planets they'd been ignoring because they were too dangerous. Right, but if humans could survive on Earth, what else might be possible? The proposal made it all the way to the Consortium Council, where it sparked the biggest debate in recent galactic history. Half the Council thought establishing relations with Earth was brilliant. The other half thought it was insane. Several members were still trying to figure out how a species could naturally evolve in conditions that would kill most known life forms. But eventually, 3 months after Captain Pith's fateful decision to open a window, the Council voted. By a narrow margin, they approved formal contact with Earth. The message was transmitted to Earth on every frequency humanity had used to communicate with the contemplative measurement. It was long, formal, and filled with the kind of diplomatic language that took 12 translators 3 weeks to properly convey. But the core message was simple. Greetings from the Galactic Consortium. You have proven yourselves to be resourceful, intelligent, and surprisingly durable. We would like to establish formal relations. Also, we would very much like to understand how you survive on your planet without constantly exploding. Please advise. The response from Earth was considerably shorter and was composed primarily by Earl, who had somehow become humanity's unofficial ambassador, despite having absolutely no qualifications for the position. Hey, yeah, we'd love to chat. Come on down. We'll leave the porch light on. Bring your precious suits, and maybe bring some of that medical technology you mentioned. Our doctors are curious. Also, what do you folks eat? We're thinking of barbecue for the welcome party, but we want to make sure nobody has any dietary restrictions. Let us know, Earl. It was the least diplomatic message in history. The consortium spent 2 days analyzing it for hidden meanings before finally accepting that no, humans really were just that casual about first contact. 6 months later, a proper diplomatic vessel arrived in Earth orbit. This one stayed firmly in orbit, with all windows sealed and pressure suits checked 3 times. Captain Pith, who had been promoted to diplomatic liaison against her will and better judgment, led the delegation. The meeting took place at the International Space Station, which had been hastily expanded to include a low-pressure section for the alien visitors. It was cramped, improvised, and absolutely perfect for the kind of chaotic diplomacy that both species were apparently very good at. The human delegation included representatives from every major nation, several scientists, and Earl, who showed up in a suit that he'd clearly bought the day before and hadn't quite figured out how to wear properly. "Welcome," the UN Secretary-General said formally. "On behalf of humanity, we greet you in peace and friendship." "Thank you for not trying to make our eyes explode this time," Captain Pith replied, which was diplomatically questionable but appreciated for its honesty. Earl raised his hand. "Quick question. You folks said something about food. You can eat, right? Because we brought sandwiches and it'd be real awkward if you photosynthesized or something." 3 diplomats tried to stop him from talking. It didn't work. "We can eat," Pith confirmed, "but our dietary requirements are very different from yours. We primarily consume liquid nutrients with high mineral content. So, like soup, I suppose? If your soup contains dissolved metals, we'll work on it." The formal negotiations took weeks. Trade agreements, cultural exchange programs, scientific cooperation, technology sharing. All the usual things that happened when 2 civilizations met for the first time, except usually those civilizations didn't have such a massive atmospheric pressure difference to work around. But they managed, slowly, carefully, with a lot of trial and error and several incidents that would have been disastrous if anyone had taken themselves too seriously. The key turned out to be that neither species did. Humans were used to adapting to impossible situations. The consortium species were used to careful scientific analysis. Together they found a middle ground. The breakthrough came when someone suggested setting up an embassy on Mars. Lower pressure than Earth, higher than the alien homeworlds. Neutral ground, perfect. Mars is a dead world, one of the UN representatives pointed out. So we make it not dead, Earl said practically. We've been talking about terraforming for years. Now we've got a reason to actually do it. And help from folks with better technology than us. It was insane. It was ambitious. It was exactly the kind of ridiculous project that both species somehow excelled at. Construction began within a year. The Mars Embassy Complex, built by humans and aliens working together, each in pressure suits that protected them from each other's comfortable environments. It was slow going. It was expensive. It was plagued with complications. It was also where Captain Pith and Earl Patterson became unlikely friends. "Your planet is still a nightmare," Pith told him during one of his visits to oversee the construction. "Yeah, but it's our nightmare," Earl said. "You get used to it." "I will never get used to it. The pressure alone—" "You got used to me, didn't you?" Pith paused. "That is a surprisingly good point. Look, I'm not saying Earth is perfect. I'm not even saying it's safe, but it's home. And if we can figure out how to work together despite all the differences, maybe that's worth something." "You are surprisingly philosophical for a cattle rancher." "I have a lot of time to think when I'm fixing fences." The Mars Embassy opened 5 years after first contact. It was a strange, beautiful structure, half human architecture and half alien design, with multiple pressure zones and more airlocks than anyone had thought necessary until they realized they absolutely were necessary. The opening ceremony was attended by representatives from 32 human nations and 17 consortium species. There were speeches, there were cultural demonstrations, there was even music, though the two species had very different ideas about what music should sound like. And there was Earl standing next to Captain Pith, watching the whole thing with quiet satisfaction. "You did good," he told her. "We did good," she corrected. "You helped, despite having no qualifications whatsoever. Sometimes that's exactly what you need, someone who doesn't know enough to understand why something shouldn't work. That is terrible advice. And yet here we are." Pith couldn't argue with that. The years that followed were complicated. There were disagreements, misunderstandings, cultural incidents that required careful diplomatic smoothing over. Humans kept accidentally frightening aliens by doing things like exercising and eating food with their hands, and existing at atmospheric pressures that should be lethal. Aliens kept confusing humans by doing things like having 4 arms and communicating partially through color changes, and not understanding why humans found their reaction to coffee so amusing. But they worked through it, because despite everything, despite all the differences and difficulties, both species had discovered something important. The universe was a lot more interesting when you weren't alone in it. And sometimes the most important discoveries happened because someone made a mistake, like opening a window without checking the atmospheric pressure first, like responding to an alien distress call even though you had no idea what you were doing, like building a rescue mission in 72 hours because someone was in trouble and you had to at least try. The Galactic Consortium's atmospheric classification system was completely overhauled. Earth was reclassified as a high-pressure habitable world, a new category that had to be created specifically for it. Hundreds of other planets were reclassified too, opening up entirely new avenues for exploration and colonization. And Captain Pith's initial disaster report became required reading for every atmospheric researcher in the consortium, with a new section added to all safety manuals. Before opening any external port, verify that your biology can actually survive the environment you're exposing yourself to. Check 3 times. If you're unsure, check 4 times. Do not assume that because the readings seem normal, they actually are normal for your species. It was titled The Pith Protocol. She hated the name, but couldn't argue with the necessity. Vinthorpe and Plunker, fully recovered with slightly mismatched eyes that they claimed gave them character, went on to become the consortium's leading experts on high-pressure environment biology. They wrote 17 papers on human physiology, all of which included some variation of, "We still don't understand how they survive this." Quillix Thornweather got his promotion and spent the rest of his career facilitating human consortium relations. He visited Earth exactly once in a heavily reinforced pressure suit and swore he would never do it again. But he kept a picture of Kansas on his desk anyway. Wimblex Thorngast became a pilot specializing in high-risk rescue operations. Apparently, almost watching his colleagues die had given him a taste for danger, or trauma, possibly both. And Earl went back to his ranch in Kansas. He still talked to Captain Pith regularly, usually about nothing important. He'd become something of a celebrity, though he tried to avoid the attention. His cattle remained unimpressed by his contributions to interstellar diplomacy. But sometimes, on clear nights, he'd sit on his porch with his shortwave radio and look up at the stars. And he'd think about how strange it was that a simple transmission had changed everything. That opening a window at the wrong time had led to friendship between species that should never have been able to understand each other. The universe, he decided, had a weird sense of humor, but he appreciated it anyway. On Mars, in the embassy complex, a memorial plaque was installed in the main hall. It read, "In commemoration of first contact between humanity and the Galactic Consortium. Established through necessity, maintained through stubbornness, and strengthened through mutual incomprehension of why anyone would voluntarily live in the other species' atmospheric pressure. May we continue to confuse and surprise each other for generations to come." Below it, in smaller text, "Remember, always check the atmospheric pressure before opening the window." It was, everyone agreed, the most important lesson anyone could learn.